The head is a central component of your thickness planer. The cutter head and feed roller is attached to it, the motor attaches on top, it rides up and down on the posts, and it is threaded to be lifted and lowered by the adjustment screw. Most issues with the head are the result of accidental damage. It can be cracked if the planer tips over or falls, or if it is struck by a falling board. If the height adjustment chain skips, it can cause the two sides of the head to become skewed, which can crack the casting. A seized cutter head bearing can spin in the head and wear the machined opening. Replacing the head is a more challenging repair, but with the help of our repair video, it is a repair that you can do yourself.
Hi, I'm Mark Socha.
Do-it-yourself repairs like these are easier than you might think. From lawn machines to cordless drills, kitchen mixers,
Outdoor grills.
our how-to videos walk you through each repair from start to finish. So doing it yourself means never having to do it alone.
Let's get started.
I'll begin by removing the side covers from the planer. Next, I'll remove the height adjustment knob. Now I'll remove the top cover. With the top cover removed, now I'll go ahead and temporarily place the adjustment handle back onto the screw post and rotate it until I bring the cutter head all the way up and off of the threads. When you get the cutter head to the very top of its travel, the clamp mechanism will push the adjustment handle off of the threaded spindle. So for the last few threads, I'll need to use a pair of pliers to rotate the spindle around. I rotate it in a counterclockwise rotation. I'll periodically check to see if the cutter head has come free of the threads. Just a little bit more. Okay, I've got the cutter head freed from the screws. Now I'm going to go ahead and tip the planer onto its front and work the cutter head off of the posts. You want to be careful as you do this. Remember that there are sharp knives inside. A rubber mallet can be useful to tap the cutter head away from the posts. Next, I'll remove the cutter head lock. It's held in place with 4 screws. Now I'll remove the cord holder and the rear dust shroud. Now I'll remove the belt guard. Next, I'll remove the cutter head drive belt. To do this, I'll need to be able to rotate the belt around on the pulleys, but because the dust shield is removed, the cutter head wants to lock in place. So I'll need to hold the cutter head lock back, and you want to be careful as you do this because the knives are exposed. I'll tip the cutter head onto its side, and now I can rotate the pulleys and work the belt off of them. Now I'm going to go ahead and remove the blades from the cutter head. The blades are held in place with a series of screws and the clamping bars. I'll remove all of the screws. The screwdriver that came with the planer has 2 magnets on the top of the handle. The magnets are used to remove the clamping bars and blades. I'll pull the cutter head lock back by hand, rotate the cutter head around to the next blade, and repeat this same process on the other 2 blades. Now I need to remove the cutter head pulley. To remove it, I'm going to take the rubber handles on a pair of pliers and insert them in the opening between the cutter head and the casting. This will bind up the cutter head so it can't rotate. And now use a socket to remove the nut. Now on the other side of the cutter head, I'll remove the sprocket and chain cover. With the cover removed, now I can remove the chains and sprockets. The sprockets are secured with retaining rings. One more retaining ring up on the top. Next, I'll remove the rollers from the bottom of the pointer. They're held in place with some retaining brackets. The roller bushings have springs behind them that push the rollers down. You'll want to keep that in mind as you remove the brackets. I'll remove each of the springs that are behind the bushings. Notice that one of the springs has an internal spring inside of it. Take note of the position of that spring. Now remove the motor from the head. It's secured with 4 screws. As you remove the screws, make sure that you support the motor. Next, I'll remove the cutter head and lock and the spring. Now I can remove the retaining ring that secures the cutter head bearing. Next, I'll remove the cutter head. To do that, I'll use a punch and insert it into the hole on the end of the cutter head that has the smaller bearing, and then I'll tap the cutter head out. Now I can begin installing the new head casting. There's a number of smaller parts on the old casting that I need to transfer from the old one over to the new, starting with the material cutting gauge. Now remove the 2 rubber bumpers that act as stops for the infeed table and install them into the new casting. Next, I'll transfer over the pointer . Now I've laid the castings down flat, and the next part I'll transfer are these alignment pins for the motor. They just simply pull out, and I insert them into the holes on the new casting. Now I'll transfer over the cutter head lock adjustment screws. I'll transfer over the retaining ring for the small cutter head bearing. Next, I'll transfer over these 2 set screws. These act as stops for the cutter head lock clamp screws. Now remove the stop pin and transfer it to the new casting. I'll reassemble the head casting assembly pretty much in the reverse order that we took it apart, starting with the cutter head. With the bearing seated and the cutter head back in place, I'll secure the larger bearing with the retaining ring. Next, the motor. The motor has a couple of holes in it that line up with these alignment pins. I'll drop the motor into place on the casting Make sure it's aligned with the alignment pins. Now tip this entire assembly up and secure the motor with the screws. Now reinstall the feed roller springs. There's 3 different styles of springs that are used. One of the springs has a smaller spring inside of it. That goes on the gearbox side on the outfeed pulley. This is the pulley that has 2 sprockets. Just above it on the infeed roller goes one of the heavier springs. There's 2 more of these. On the opposite side of the infeed roller is the lighter spring. And the last one on the outfeed roller is the heavy spring. Now I can reinstall the feed rollers. Each of the feed roller assemblies are the same. I'll align the bushings. Now secure the rollers using the retainers. You'll notice that 2 of the retainers have elongated screw holes, and the other 2 don't. The 2 with the elongated holes go on the drive belt side, and the 2 with the non-elongated holes go on the gearbox side. Now reinstall the cutter head belt pulley. First the key, followed by the pulley, and I'll secure it with the nut. Again, I'll need to bind the cutter head to tighten up the nut. And I'll use the rubber grips on my pliers to wedge between the cutter head and the casting. Now reinstall the cutter head drive belt. Now reinstall the cutter head lock. When you tighten the lock down, it should still pivot freely. If it doesn't, then you'll need to adjust the set screw on the back side. This set screw should be tightened against the back of the screw that you use to tighten up the lock. Now replace the cutter head clamp spring. You'll notice that one end of the spring has a slight hook bent onto it, and the other end is just smooth. The smooth end goes on top of this portion of the casting. I'll secure it with the screw and washer. Then the end with the hook gets pulled back so it sits against the clamp. I don't want this screw too tight so that the spring can pivot. To adjust the screw, I'll use the set screw on the inside of the casting. The clamp should work smoothly once everything is set. Now I can reinstall the sprockets and chains. First, the chain that goes between the motor and the outfeed roller. The sprocket for the motor is one of 2 that have the tall hub. The sprocket for the outfeed roller has the shorter hub. I'll first install the motor shaft sprocket. Then I'll rotate the outfeed roller until it aligns with the key on the sprocket and push this into place. Now I can do the chain that links the 2 rollers together. First I place the spacer over the infeed roller. Both of these sprockets are the same. I attach the first sprocket to the outfeed roller and then again rotate the infeed roller until the key lines up. And now I can secure the sprockets onto all 3 shafts with the retaining rings. Now reinstall the chain cover. Now reinstall the knives. When you install the knife, the bevel should be up, and you'll notice there's an alignment pin on each end of the cutter head, and that aligns with this hole in the knife. So I'll put the knife into place on the cutter head, place the clamp bar over the knife, and then secure it with the screws. And I repeat this same process for the other 2 knives. Now reinstall the belt guard. Now reinstall the dust shield. and the cord clamp. Now I can install our reassembled cutter head assembly back onto the base. Now I want to make sure that the head casting is aligned with each of the threaded spindles, and make sure that the casting is down tight against the tops of them. I'll temporarily place the adjustment handle over the threaded rod on one side and begin to rotate it down. As I do this, I need to make sure that both screws on each side catch. Now both threaded rods have caught, and it's lowering the cutter head down. Now I need to check the cutter head for parallel to the table. To do that, I'll use a small square. I'll adjust the cutter head until one of the planer knives just touches the top of the rule on the square, right there. Now I'll move the square to the opposite side of the table and check the knife on that side. And it's a little low on this side. So to make my adjustment, I'll need to lay the planer onto its side. Now I have access to the sprockets and chain that rotate the threaded rods to adjust the cutter head up and down. I'll loosen the 2 screws that secure the sprocket. With the screws loosened, now I can turn the threaded rod on one side without rotating the one on the other. So with the sprocket loose, now I can go ahead and turn the rod by hand. I just want to slightly raise this side. I'll do a little at a time, and then again use my square to check my progress. Just a little bit more. That looks good, so now I'll go ahead and tighten up the set screws on the sprocket. Now I can reinstall the cutter head clamp. The brackets go on the inside of the posts. Once everything is in place, I'll secure the brackets with the screws. Now I can reinstall the cover. Now I'll reinstall the adjustment handle. And we'll finish up by reinstalling the side covers. Make sure you get the cover with the scale on the right side. Although replacing the head may be a time-consuming repair, it is something that you can do yourself. And replacing it yourself will save you a lot of money versus taking your planer to a repair shop. Be sure to check back often for new videos and expert advice. If you found this video helpful, give us a thumbs up
And leave a comment.